Welcome to lesson 3. This is for the Adobe Illustrator classes at South Mountain Community College. We are using 2 different versions of the classroom in a book text series. We have a 2013 and a 2015 series. These videos are going to help guide both the hybrid and internet students to finish the lessons in better detail than the textbook uses. We are also going to go out of order from the textbook because the textbook jumps around and you don't realize what you're creating. And I feel it's important for you guys to understand what you're creating and how it's being made. So these are intended to go along with the textbook, and they are not intended to be a substitution for the textbook. So I hope you enjoy. I hope these help you guys out just so much more with understanding on how to use the textbook, not textbook, but how to use the program Adobe Illustrator in better. I want you to be able to apply these eventually. So for lesson 3, in the 2013 text, you are creating a house, as you can see as I opened up in the files, that it's a house, Metro Reality, or Realty, my bad, and you're creating and editing shapes. So, and that's what most pictures are. They're just shapes on top of them, each other. So we're going to start off with creating our own house that looks like this, but not quite. So I already have Adobe Illustrator open. I like to open it up to just see what I'm supposed to be making for this program. So we're going to be creating a new document to create our file in. So I'm going to be using the Mac space. So if you're familiar with Mac, great. If you're not, if you're a PC, the functions are going to be slightly different, but the application of the software is going to be the same. So I'm going to open a new, I'm in QuickTime. I'm going to be in Adobe Illustrator and go to File, New. And this is our new document. This should look familiar. I'm going to name my file first so I know where it goes. You should always, since you're turning your stuff in, you should always name your files first. So I like to do first initial, last name. And then in the getting started, the book will always tell you how to name or rename a file. And this says it wants us to save it. Actually, in the creating new it wants us to save it as home sale. So I'm going to underscore home sale. And since I'm doing a demo, I'm going to do demo. Please don't use demo, but since I am, and my files will be coherent. Now, since I've already made this file once before, my profile settings have already matched up. So you can follow along with the text. You need 2 artboards. You want it by row, and that's where you want your artboards arranged. Spacing 1 inch. You want your units to be in inches because we're in America and we use inches. 8 by 8, and ignore the bleed. Now if this advanced is toggled open, you always want to make sure it is 300 ppi. Now there's a difference between CMYK and RGB. It is not a huge deal. We will get into a color unit down in the semester, but let's just change it to CMYK so we know. All right, everything looks good, and I'm going to press OK. And our new document looks like this. Now, since I have my end file up, I can just toggle back and forth with these tabs. Always good to keep it open so you can see, am I making what's supposed to be correct? All right, so there's functions for setting up multiple artboards, grid by row, where each time you add a new artboard, it would just follow the row. And if you want to add artboards in our panels, we have artboards and layers, which we'll get into. If you open up artboards, if I press this new page icon, I've added a new artboard, and since I'm doing grid by row, it keeps adding them to the right with an inch. I've already made those options available. So I'm just going to do a delete of artboard 3 and 4 since I do not need them. I just need artboard 1 and 2. Now this wants us to set up a bleed, and a bleed is when we print it out, there's sort of that buffer between the print and the paper. So if you're getting into print design with Adobe Illustrator, this will be important. This also would be important for you guys when you take the InDesign course that I also teach. So we're going to open up the document setup. Now in our control panel, our document setup is right here. And we're still in inches, and we're going to change it to 0.125 of an inch. That's an eighth of an inch. And it changed all of them because this lock is here. It makes all the settings the same. Now, if you want to make the bleed different on the top part or the bottom part, here's where you would do it. Let's say if you're doing a package design for a client and it's an irregular sized box. Now that's when you would change the bleed throughout. But typically the bleed is going to be the same throughout. Grid size and grid colors, you just ignore that. And I'm going to press OK. Now you notice that red outline, that's our bleed. That's not going to print out, or when we export, that's just what it looks like. So we're going to get started because we're going to create our house. Now the book has you doing a few different things at once. We're going to be focusing on the house part first before we start jumping into the roof or the outside. The book has you jump around a bit too much for my liking. And this will be also in segments too. So it's not, so if you're only having trouble with the roof, this is where you're going to be. Well, this is not where you're going to be. We're going to be on the house first. So we're going to build our house foundation. So it wants us to reset essentials. And there's been some discussion about this in the in-class portion. Once you're comfortable with your location of all of your panels, maybe you have them set up in a way that makes sense for you. You do not have to reset essentials every time. It is suggestions so you know where everything's located. Sometimes in the class I may reset your essentials or change your workspace so I am familiar, so when I'm reaching for a tool, it's where I know it is. But you want the rulers, so you can go down to Window, View Rulers, Show Rulers, or you can do a Command R or Control R if you're in PC. And I just did that, and look, we have our rulers. And they keep a measurement. Right down here is 0. And I can scroll around and it keeps the measurement of where everything is. So if I client wants something, 1 by 1 inch start the logo, that's where I would begin. Another cool thing with rulers is you can pull down guides. This book doesn't really go into them at this moment. But if I just take my cursor from the ruler and pull down, I'll have a teal guide, and I can line it up to wherever I need in my document. Same thing with horizontal, right down there. Now I'm just going to Command Z and get rid of those guides because I don't need them. But that's a good thing to set up. The same is true for Adobe Photoshop if you're a Photoshop fan. So it talks about these drawing modes, which personally I don't use as much. I'd rather just go to the Object Arrange, Send to Front, Send to Back, or adjust it in my Layers panel. But this is another way to do it. So in your tool panel right down here, if we cover over, we have Draw Normal, Draw Behind, and Draw Inside. The book kind of goes in more depth on what those functions are. Typically, in your Draw Normal, in the book we'll be doing a Draw Behind. So it wants us to, let's fit this window, this view, fit artboard in window, and we have our artboard in our window. It wants us to open the transform panel because we'll be using it, and that's going to be Window, Transform, and it's this dialog box. I can drag it to wherever I need it. I'm going to place it right there just for me. and we're going to draw a rectangle. And in our tool panel and our shapes tool, it's right there, or keyboard shortcut M. I will be referring to the keyboard shortcuts. It saves you time and lots of clicking. So we're going to draw a rectangle, and I haven't lifted up my mouse. But if you notice, to the right, we have a W 5.29 and an H 2.43. Now that's the actual size of our shape. And if I move it, as you can see, the size adjusts. This measurement label is really going to be helpful when we have exact measurements that we need to create for our clients. So I'm going to do a Command Z because I don't need it. And we're going to do another rectangle. It's going to be approximately 4.7 inches wide and a height of 2.3. So we could get to M, and 4.7 gets a little touchy, especially if you're using a trackpad like me as opposed to a cursor or a pen tool. And I'm just trying to get the best I can. Alright, so that's a good close estimate. Now if you look at my transform panel, it's already made the sizes. The X and Y axis is where it's placed on the field of my sheet of paper or my artboard. And the H and W are my width and height. So I can get exact by just changing that to 7 and changing that to 3 to have exact measurements. If I go to my selection tool, keyboard V, I can move it around to wherever I like it. And we're going to do the fill and the stroke. Now this should be something you should already be getting kind of a good hand at. So in my control panel, I can drop down, and the book has kind of very specific colors using the CMYK scale. Now if you went to CMYK, this is going to be easy. C50, M70, Y80, K70. And that's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Black is K, because RGB is got blue. And it's the same color scale. It works in the same color space, which when we get into color, we'll talk so much about it. But right now, it's actually going to be just this brown. And if I hover over it, I have C50, M70, Y80, K70. And I'm going to click that. And so that dark brown fills, it does a fill, and the stroke is just going to remain black. Now if I'm ever curious, oh, is there a stroke or not a stroke, I can go. Alright, sorry about that, the video kind of disrupted. As I was saying, you can always go back to the end file that the book gives you to kind of give you a look, and I can see that there is a stroke on the house. So we're going to go back to home sale demo, and you can always rearrange it there, but that's fine for now. And we're going to keep with our rectangle tool. Now I'm going to go to M to make sure my rectangle tool is selected. I could always go down and look and see what's pressed on my tools panel. Now what I'm going to do is just click my cursor on any blank space in my artboard. And that brings up this dialog box, and I can have exact measurements. It's going to be width of 1 and a height of 1.6. So if I do 1, tab 1.6. And this is a preset measurement. I don't have to open up that transform panel. And I click OK. Go to my V for my selection tool, and I can place it wherever I want. Now this we're going to place around in the bottom edge, a little closer to the left. I'm going to do a Command plus to kind of zoom in. And I can use my cursor, my keyboard, to nudge it around. Now it's brown, and the book says it wants this to be a nice red. So I'm going to open up the control panel. And what we're looking for is C15, M100, Y90, K10, which is this red. And I'm going to keep select, and we're going to keep its stroke at the moment. Now what I noticed is when we were moving this, it will sometimes snap to the bottom of our shape because it's using smart guides. Typically when you're moving shapes around in these programs, Adobe, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, etc., it's going to want to, you usually place things next to each other, and the program has figured that out. And if yours isn't doing it, you need to go to View, Smart Guides, and make sure that is checked so that is on. It's one of my favorite features. It makes my life so much simpler instead of zooming in and doing nudging over and over about 10 years ago when I started with Illustrator. So our next thing is we're going to make a copy. Now I can just click on this, Command C, Command V, and we got another copy. But this is another option that happens a lot, and Adobe Illustrator's made it simple for us. So we're going to make a copy, and we're going to use a modifier key when we're using our cursor. And these modifier keys are going to be your new favorite thing. So you're going to hold down Alt for Windows or Option for Mac. And actually my keyboard says Alt Option, so it's for both. And I'm going to click and drag. And as you can see, I have 2 house doors. Now a house does not need 2 doors. So it doesn't really help us with that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to resize our measurements. And we want it to just kind of change the height of 1.1 inch and the width 2.3. So we're going to take our cursor and we're going to make this width about 2.3, and we're making our window here. And a height of 1.1. And we have our window, but we can't see through this window, so we're going to change the color to white. We have a nice window, and it's really cool that it is actually arranged to where the top of the door and the window are matched. Now the book wants us to work on our chimney, and we're actually going to not do our chimney. So I'm just going to make a note, and if I'm following with the textbook and video, I'm just going to dog ear my book. Or if you are wanting to know, we're on page 88. And it talks about the document grid. Now, the next step we're going to do, making sure, we're going to create the bottom ledge for our window, because windows need bottom ledges. The book talks about the document grid a little bit, and you can read on that. It's pretty helpful. Remember we did those grid lines in the beginning of this video. It's going to be kind of like that, and the book will get into depth on it. So it wants us to make that rounded corner for the top of the chimney, which again we're going to do when we work on the roof. So I'm just going to dog ear page 89 for later. But we're going to do the same kind of step for the ledge. So we're kind of on step 7 on page 90. So over here in our rectangle tool, I'm going to go to the rounded rectangle tool from our tools panel. It's just underneath. I pulled this open by clicking and holding. That's how you open up these nested files. And we're going to change our fill because we have a new color, and it's going to be a gray, so the K is going to be 20. Highlight over, that's K20. Ooh. Watch what you're selected, because sometimes it will make changes like that. Just do Command Z, make sure I'm not selected on that. Our new shape. Alright, and what we're going to do is click somewhere anywhere on the outside, and we're going to type in our width. Now this would have gone with the previous used settings for the chimney, but we're not making that chimney, so we're going to follow around what the book says. In about 0.139, let's just make it 0.4, just to round up. And the corner radius is where it's curved in and out, and I'll show you how to make those adjustments. But we're going to make that 0.02. So if I go to my selection tool, as you can see, I have my object here. I'm going to line it up to be center, and as you can see, we're moving it where it says intersect in that magenta. That's using the smart guides to find the center of these two pieces. I'm going to just zoom in a second. And these little red, not red, blue circles where my cursor is round, I can round my ledge or make it less round. And that's a good way to add those modifiers. Now we could have typed those in, but I can round it out to based on looks. Remember, it's going to be the ledge at the bottom, so I'm feeling that's pretty good. Now at this moment, I'm going to zoom out, Command negative. And it's looking pretty good. Now I need to save my file because I didn't save it at first. And guess what? Adobe Illustrator will crash. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and make sure it's saved in the correct location. I have lesson 3, and I'm just going to save it right here. Everything looks fine. And that way throughout I can do a Command S and save my file as many times as I need to. So when if and when Adobe crashes, my progress is saved. Now we're going to work on, so the next part kind of brings a couple different parts from the book that separate them out, and we're just going to make them into one. So it makes sense to what you're making. So we're going to be creating ellipses, or circles. And that's the next step. We're on page 90 if you're on the textbook. So the keyboard shortcut L, or if on your tool panel right there. And we're creating ellipse. We're going to use this door as our guide. So as you can see, I can just draw out. If I hold down Shift, actually, it'll keep a perfect circle. I'm going to do a Command Z. If I'm holding down Option, wherever I point my cursor, it draws out from that point. Command Z again. We're not using those functions. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually make sure this is a nice light gray. I think the book doesn't specify what color, but try to keep a light gray. But let's try to keep that 20 right there. So we're going to draw a shape. And I actually just want it to be edge to edge. So I'm going to start my cursor from where that said anchor, and where it's lining up right here, my cursor, next to where it says path, that means it's separated out. Now it should have a height of 0.7 and the width should be an inch. And there I have my sphere. Now what I'm going to do is hide this bounding box so we can play with it a bit more. So with this selected, I'm going to go to View, down to Hide Bounding Box, which is around the middle. That takes that bounding box off, and I can only see the blue outline there. And what I can do is I'm just going to drag this up where it says intersect. And that's where I know it's in the center. And I can go to View, Show Bounding Box to get that back up. Sometimes that bounding box makes it a little difficult to shift it up. And we're going to open up this transform panel really quick to make sure the width did change. So make sure that's a 0.7. And we're going to click return just to make sure it's the size that it needs to be. Deselect, and we're going to hit save. Now, what we're going to do next is kind of jump ahead in the book. So if you're following the textbook, we are jumping to page 103, combining and editing shapes. This is going to be your least favorite thing, but it has a cool effect, and it took me a couple steps to get it just right. And we may have some frustration here. So let's just do another Command S to save our spot. And we're going to get started.